So as we get into our discussion about the New Mutants, we're going to need to take a step back here, and we're going to need to look at more than simply just the story involving the Brood that led into the creation of the New Mutants. We actually need to take a step back and do a little bit of discussion about this channel so far. For those of you guys that were with me from the beginning, we had talked about how over the course of this channel, we were going to be getting into stories. We were going to be getting into things where this channel was going to start moving in a direction where we were going to have to reference back to the old stuff. Now, for those of you guys who are new, you guys didn't know about this. You guys didn't know that this is what we were going to be doing. And so New Mutants is going to be our first step in that direction. This is our first step in a much bigger picture. And the reason why is because the New Mutants is going to allow us to segue into introducing all kinds of new characters into Marvel Comics, the Hellions, Selene, Deadpool. This is going to give us the stories whereby these characters are brought in. And the reason why is because this story was founded and it was created by both Chris Claremont and Louise Simonson. And the reason why was explained to us in Wizard Magazine issue number 24 in August of 1993. And what Louise Simonson had said was that Jim Shooter, who at the time was head of Marvel, wanted to start bringing in all these different tie-ins, wanted to start, creating all these different branch-offs of the X-Men due to the popularity of the X-Men under Chris Claremont. Now, initially, Chris Claremont and Louise Simonson didn't really want to do this. And so what Jim Shooter said was that either they can do it or he'll have somebody else do it in their place. And because Chris Claremont was considered the writer, the one person that could best create a story based on the X-Men, and Louise Simonson had found her niche in X-Factor, it made sense that they would be the two that would collaborate to create a branch off of the X-Men titled New Mutants. Now, in terms of the New Mutants actually coming into fruition, or I guess being created, this was given to us in Uncanny X-Men issues number 155 through 157 and issues number 161 to 167. And what we saw over the course of the stories was an introduction of an alien race called the Brood. Now, the Brood are an alien race that can effectively plant a embryo of sorts into a host, and the embryo will grow. It'll be, it'll develop, and it'll take on both the traits and the appearance of its host, but the host will die in the process. But what the embryo also does is it takes on everything that makes the host what it is. So it takes on their memories. It, for the most part, becomes the host, and it allows that information to be sent back to the hive mind, to the actual Brood Empress, the head of the Brood hierarchy, which in turn can be used to expand the Brood's empire as it seeks to conquer that particular race that it's somehow managed to duplicate. Now, with Uncanny X-Men, we had seen over the course of these stories that the sister of Lilandra, Deathbird, was looking to usurp the throne of the Shi'ar Empire. And so to do that, she had, allied herself with the Brood. But because the X-Men were considered very close to the Shi'ar through Xavier and Lilandra, her goal was to somehow find a way to eliminate the X-Men. And this worked well for the Brood, because the reason that this worked so well was that the Brood could replace the X-Men with Brood replicants, and so they could then turn and undergo the process of conquering the planet Earth. And so what we saw was that over the course of this series, that the concept had come into existence. The idea had come along that the X-Men appeared to have been converted into Brood, and the original X-Men had been killed off. Now, this was from the perspective of Charles Xavier. Now, we know this wasn't the case. We know that Carol Danvers, who at the time was powerless, was experimented on by the Brood. She became the character Binary in Chris Claremont's attempt to rewrite her character. But because Charles Xavier didn't know this, he had believed the X-Men had been killed off. And so initially his idea was to walk away from the concept of having an X-Men team, walking away from his dream of having some sort of group that can fight on the side of mutants and attempt to do what it can to find a democratic and a peaceful way to coexist with humans. But as we'll see throughout the introduction of New Mutants in Marvel graphic novel issue number 4, we'll see that Charles Xavier will begin to change his tune, and this tune will be changed due to a series of circumstances which forced him to come into contact with the New Mutants, but also due to some prodding at the hands of Moira McTaggart. So, unlike X Factor or Excalibur or Generation X, where we went into an explanation on the comic that first introduced us to these teams, with New Mutants, we're actually going to be skimming over this pretty fast. And the reason why is because we're going to be covering a lot of things over the course of the New Mutants in Marvel Comics in a very short amount of time. And so, as we're introduced to this story, we first pick up with Moira McTaggart. And Moira McTaggart is spending time on the side of a hill, more or less collecting her thoughts, and she encounters apparently a wolf which has leaped over her. And this is a surprise to Moira McTaggart because, as she tells us, wolves haven't been seen in that part of the country for generations. But as things progress, she realizes that this is not an ordinary wolf, that the wolf actually begins to change form. And when it does, it changes into a girl named Rain Sinclair, also called Wolfsbane. And what Moira McTaggart does is she protects Wolfsbane from the people who are pursuing her, individuals who believe that she's somehow a witch or in league with Satan because they don't understand the premise of what mutant powers are. Now, Moira McTaggart is able to vouch for the young girl and able to tell the individuals to back off, which they do. And Moira McTaggart takes Wolfsbane to the only person that she thinks can truly help her, which of course is Charles Xavier. From here, we switch to Robert DaCosta, or Sunspot. And of course, in Brazil, he's in the middle of a soccer game. And as he's in this soccer game, he's being bullied by another one of the players who physically assaults him. Because the referees don't see it and no one makes a call, Robert DaCosta begins to get angry about it, and so he takes things into his own hands. And when he does, his mutant powers begin to manifest as he's taking a beating from the person who was bullying him. And the mutant powers, as they manifest, cause the person who was fighting him to be, blown away. And the people around him begin to panic. Of course, his family, with the exception of his mom, runs off, and she seems to be the only person that's willing to comfort him. From here, we switch to Sam Guthrie, or Cannonball. And of course, he's the son of a coal miner who had previously been killed in a coal mining incident. And while Sam and another co-worker are working within the mine, there's a cave-in. And during the cave-in, of course, Sam's powers manifest as he's trying to find some way out for the two of them. Now, what his powers do are allow him to project or catapult himself out of the mine and into the nearby woods. Now, initially, his co-worker chalks this up to a miracle, and Sam agrees, although Sam has come to the realization that he's developed abilities and is still trying to figure out how to deal with this. From here, we switch to Danielle Moonstar, to Mirage. And Danielle Moonstar appears to have already had her powers manifested. They seem to have already made themselves known. And of course, she's confronted by her grandfather, who tells her that because of the abilities that she possesses, that her best, choice or her best role here is to go to the Xavier Institute of Gifted Youngsters. And initially, Danielle Moonstar doesn't want to do this. She feels as though that Charles Xavier is an outsider, that he can't understand her people. And Chris Claremont, keeping trends with racial issues and dealing with real-world events in Marvel Comics, of course, takes homage to this when Danielle Moonstar says that Charles Xavier is a white man and that she'll never go with a white man because he can't truly understand her. But of course, her grandfather says that she doesn't really have a choice in the matter, that she has to, that it's really his command that is making this happen. What we also see with Danielle Moonstar is that she has a premonition of sorts where her grandfather is killed. And when she arrives to the scene, she sees that he is dead. And of course, for her, she knows that this wasn't some kind of an accident. She knows that somebody has intentionally done this, that somebody has killed her grandfather. And so for her, this is simply just a matter of a personal vendetta that needs to be solved. At this point, we switch back to the Xavier Institute, and we join Charles Xavier, Wolfsbane, and Moira McTaggart as they're, investigating the powers of a young woman who will go under the name Mirage. Now, this woman is able to, as she explains it, take over the minds of other people and possess them. And when she does, she effectively becomes that person. She knows all their experiences. She knows everything it is that makes them who they are. And so for her, this is an ability that allows her to directly tap in to a person's very essence. Now, initially, Charles Xavier asks her to display her abilities, and at first she's a little hesitant. She's not really sure that she wants to, but Moira McTaggart tells her to go ahead and do it on her, to use her powers on her. And so what Mirage does is she takes over. She possesses the body of Moira McTaggart and becomes Moira McTaggart. And operating under Moira McTaggart, she demonstrates her abilities, tells everybody that this is what happens when she takes over the mind of a person, that she has absolute control control of their body. And so Charles Xavier, who's very surprised by this, who is amazed by this, agrees to bring Mirage on as part of this young group of mutants. But from here, this is when we see Charles Xavier begin to second guess himself. This is when we see him more or less debating whether or not this is something that he really wants to get into. Of course, what Moira McTaggart hints at us here, what she tells us here, I guess figures out along the way, is that Mirage's powers had more or less just developed on their own. They had come to her, and she had developed them by herself without any assistance from anybody. And the reason why was because she comes from Vietnam, and during this time, Vietnam was very war-torn. And so she had to learn to adapt. She had to learn to use these abilities to her advantage in order to keep her from, acquiescing to the negative environment that was Vietnam at the time. What we also see is that Rain believes that maybe these powers that she has are a curse from Satan. But what Charles Xavier says is that's not the case. The powers she has are natural. It's simply the next step in human evolution, and that it has nothing to do with Satan or any kind of religion whatsoever. It's simply just the way that her body is evolving. From here, we see that Moira McTaggart and Charles Xavier begin to get into this debate. Of course, Charles Xavier is communicating with Moira McTaggart telepathically, and because Charles Xavier has opened this telepathic bridge, Moira McTaggart is able to communicate as well. And what Charles says is that he doesn't want to do this anymore, that the X-Men were like his family, and that with their deaths, he's experienced the death of his family, and so he doesn't want to undergo this process again. But Moira McTaggart says that this is the nature of being an X-Man, that the idea they fight for is more important than their individual lives. And so X-Men will come and go. People will join the X-Men and they will die for the cause because that's the nature of being an X-Man. Moira McTaggart says that this is the whole reason why the team was founded. That Charles Xavier had created the X-Men for the purpose of teaching mutants how to use their abilities, teaching them how to function within normal society, but also having mutants use their abilities in such a way to where they would be superheroes and they would be accepted and they would be able to blend in and I guess bridge a gap between the perception of mutants by humanity and the realistic nature of mutants by humanity. And so from here we see that the group gets a letter in the mail, and the letter they've received is from the grandfather of Daniel Moonstar. The grandfather, of course, is writing to Charles Xavier saying that he would like Daniel Moonstar to attend the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters for her to learn how to control her powers. And so Charles Xavier and the group travel back to the Indian reservation. Now from here we pick up at the actual location in Colorado of this reservation, and when they arrive they realize that that Black Eagle, the grandfather of Daniel Moonstar, has been killed. And so the question that Mirage asks here is, what are they going to do? How are they going to be able to find Danielle Moonstar if her grandfather, the only person that knew where she was, is now deceased? But before they can go too much further, they're immediately bombarded by what appears to be a Vietnamese infiltration force, or perhaps something to give them the illusion that they are back in Vietnam. And again, this is simply Danielle Moonstar using her powers, and this is when it's explained to us, for the most part, I guess in any real detail, what it is that she's able to do. Danielle Moonstar is able to cast illusions in the mind of a person, but the illusions are based on empathy, meaning that she's able to tap into the emotions of a person, and so she can create illusions based on their worst fears or based on their happiest moments. It depends on what it is that she wants to do. But being that, as we see with her character, she's being pursued, she's using her ability to cast illusions into anybody around her and to force them to flee. Of course, the forces that are currently chasing her are the forces of Donald Pierce, a member of the Hellfire Club who is attempting to eliminate all mutants and trying to start with the younger generation of mutants. And of course, as these forces are chasing after her, her mountain lion comes to the rescue. But the mountain lion Ridge Runner is killed almost immediately, and so as a result Danielle Moonstar begins to get angry. But of course, as she's about to be attacked and presumably killed by the forces of Donald Pierce, we see that Mirage comes to her aid. And what Mirage does here is she takes over the mind and body of this particular agent, and when she does, the agent starts killing people. It starts killing the other forces of Donald Pierce. And so with Donald Pierce's forces now more or less eliminated, the group led by Charles Xavier alongside Danielle Moonstar are able to gather together again and able to retreat back to their current location. From here, we transition to the hotel room that Daniel Moonstar, that Karma, and that Maura McTaggart are staying in. And it seems as though these individuals that have appeared are police officers, and the police officers are here to arrest all of these individuals. Now, initially, Maura McTaggart asks why it is the police are here, but she's immediately assaulted for her questioning, and the group is, of course, taken by the police. But what Karma does in the process is she takes over the mind of one of the police officers, and so when the police officer goes to put handcuffs on her, he doesn't actually secure them. The handcuffs are loose, and of course this is done by Karma herself. As soon as the group gets down to the lobby, the police officer that Karma is possessing assaults the second police officer, and the group takes this time to make their escape into a crowd outside of the hotel. From here, the group is transitioned back to the home of Robert DaCosta, and what Robert DaCosta is doing is apparently leaving. Now, of course, the group is following him as they were instructed by Maura McTaggart to do, and the goal here, as far as we can tell, is for them to possibly try to recruit Sunspot. And as they follow Sunspot, they end up in a warehouse in the I guess the slum district of Rio de Janeiro. Now, apparently, as far as we're able to tell, Sunspot had come here and said that he would agree to hand himself over if they would release Juliana, but of course the forces refused to do both. And so what we see as things progress is that while Sunspot tries to use his powers, that he doesn't quite have control of them, and so he is almost immediately overpowered by the forces of Donald Pierce. But before things begin to get too chaotic, Karma again uses her powers Mirage uses her powers to create illusions in the minds of other people to force one, or I guess a multitude of these henchmen to see Wolverine. And of course, Wolverine, during the Uncanny X-Men events with their encounter with the Hellfire Club, had already come into contact with a multitude of these henchmen, and so for them, their worst fear is to actually see Wolverine. And so, of course, with the illusions cast alongside the actions of the remaining members of the New Mutants, they're able to assist in trying to help Robert DaCosta escape. But over the course of the conflict, one of the henchmen tries to shoot Robert DaCosta, and when he does, Juliana jumps in the way. And the result is that Juliana is killed. Now, of course, Sunspot takes this very, very hard, but what we see is that there's some common ground that's found between Karma, Mirage, and Sunspot when Karma and Mirage say that they want to help Sunspot get back at the person that's done this, because the person that has put them in this situation is targeting all of them, and so in a way they can all gain their own revenge. From here we transition to Charles Xavier and to Wolfsbane, and the two of them are apparently traveling through Kentucky looking for a Cannonball, but when they find him, it's actually due to the fact that he has rammed into their vehicle and sent their vehicle toppling over. Of course, Charles Xavier tells Wolfsbane to run, and Wolfsbane, while she initially takes off, thinks that maybe she can turn back around and she can try to help Charles Xavier, but when she looks back, she of course sees that that Cannonball is dragging Charles Xavier's body away. Now, Cannonball is apparently working for the forces of Donald Pierce, although at this moment we don't exactly know why. It seems like he is legitimately on the payroll, and so we don't know if he's somehow being coerced or if he's doing it of his own accord. But the group is able to load up Charles Xavier and take Charles Xavier away in a helicopter. From here we follow Wolfsbane as she is tracking down the helicopter, and this leads her to a compound that's of course surrounded by fences and various forms of security. She's able to get herself past the fences and into the compound itself, and when she does, she looks inside and sees Donald Pierce alongside the henchmen. And what Donald Pierce is doing is he's telling Charles Xavier what he wants to do. Of course, he tells Xavier that his plan here is to, of course, remove Charles Xavier's ability to use his mind to combat any of them, but the other purpose of the devices attached to Charles Xavier is to allow Donald Pierce to use Charles Xavier's mind to locate a multitude of other mutants, which of course he can in turn eliminate. And this is the motivation of Donald Pierce. Donald Pierce, as part of the Hellfire Club, is attempting to eliminate all mutants everywhere, including those who are part of the Hellfire Club, and to move himself up to the very peak of the male position in the Hellfire Club as the Black King. And of course, as Wolfsbane is looking at this, the other members of the New Mutants arrive. But in addition to the arrival of these other New Mutants comes Cannonball. And this is when it's revealed to us that it appears Cannonball really is working for the forces of Donald Pierce of his own accord. And of course, Cannonball is able to knock down Wolfsbane, but as he is getting ready to attack Wolfsbane again, Mirage uses her power to make him believe that he is back in a cave-in, that he's back in the cave, or I guess in the tunnels in Cameron, Kentucky, and is experiencing a cave-in once more. And so because of his fear, because this is overwhelming him, he takes off. And what the New Mutants do is they use this time to break into the facility to attempt to rescue Charles Xavier. And for the most part, they're largely successful, albeit they're still learning how to use their powers. Over the course of the conflict, we of course see that Karma is trying to use her ability to tap into the mind of Cannonball, but because she's so panicked, because she's so overwhelmed, she's not able to concentrate. And so instead, she simply grabs a machine gun and begins shooting at the forces of Donald Pierce. From here, we transition to the interior of the compound as the New Mutants are making their way in. Of course, Wolfsbane is the first one to attack Donald Pierce, but she's thrown off almost immediately to the side of Charles Xavier and appears to be unconscious. Mirage arrives and attempts to cast illusions in the mind of Donald Pierce, but Donald Pierce says that because he's part cyborg, that these effects don't work on him, that psychic attacks don't affect him, or at the very least, the kind of a psychic attack that she's attempting to use doesn't work on him. From here, we again transition back to the rest of the team as they're going in turn to do what they can to try to defeat Donald Pierce. But while this is going on, Charles Xavier is speaking with Wolfsbane, and he tells her to use the console behind him to turn off the machine that is attached to his head so that Charles Xavier can use his powers. And as we move forward, as we continue with this story, we of course see that Cannonball apparently begins to come to his senses, that perhaps he realizes he's fighting on the wrong side. And when Donald Pierce realizes this, Donald Pierce attempts to kill Cannonball. But before he can, Charles Xavier, whose mind has apparently been released from its control, takes over Donald Pierce. And when he does, while it's a struggle, he overcomes. He's able to effectively shut down the mind, or at the very least take over the mind of Donald Pierce to keep him from killing Cannonball. From here, the story begins to wrap up. We of course see that the New Mutants are able to save Wolfsbane. They're able to overcome Donald Pierce due to the fact that he's now under the control of Charles Xavier, and the group is trying to decide what it is they should do with Cannonball, what it is they should do with him. But the initial idea is to simply just leave him, to let him come to his own terms and to do what he wants to do. From here, we go back to the Xavier Mansion about two to 3 weeks, maybe a month later, and Charles Xavier is reflecting on the X-Men, the original X-Men, the new generation of the X-Men, and he's come to this realization that he does need to undertake the role of having X-Men. The X-Men need to exist. There has to be someone that can be out there and that can somehow try to bridge the gap between humanity and mutant kind. And so, of course, we see that the New Mutants are putting on their new uniforms, they're getting themselves dressed, and as they meet with Charles Xavier, we see that Cannonball, that Sam Guthrie arrives, and Charles Xavier tells the New Mutants not to panic, that he invited Cannonball here, that Cannonball had been tricked by Donald Pierce into believing that the New Mutants were the bad guys, but as the story and as the events had progressed, Sam Guthrie had come into his own and realizing that it was really Donald Pierce who was the bad guy. And so as the story comes to a close, we see the New Mutants coming together and greeting Sam Guthrie as their newest recruit. So after Marvel Graphic Novel issue number 4, New Mutants of course got their own solo series with New Mutants issue number 1. And over the course of these comics, we saw a lot of things beginning to change. We saw all kinds of stuff going on with these stories because again, New Mutants was running alongside the X-Men. We saw new people being brought in. We saw Cypher, we saw Magma, we saw Magic, the younger sister of Colossus, Warlock. We saw a lot of these characters coming into play. But in the background, over the course of this series, we also also saw things changing with regards to individuals. In 1986, we of course saw the trial of Magneto, something we had touched on in the X-Men Explained video. And with the trial of Magneto, as we had previously discussed, Magneto was turning over a new leaf. And so with Charles Xavier being removed as the leader of the X-Men, Magneto took his place. Now this of course coincided with New Mutants issue number 35 and remained for about 40 issues or so. But again, what we saw over the course of this series and over the course in the background was that Chris Claremont was also launching his own branch-off series, most notably the series of Excalibur. And so with issue number 55 in 1987, Chris Claremont had walked away and the series was turned over to Louise Simonson. But Louise Simonson was also doing X-Factor at the same time. And so this is one of the reasons why we had seen characters like Richter and Skids, who were part of X-Factor, being folded into the New Mutant story. But over the course of the 3 years which Louise Simonson was writing the series alongside X-Factor, the series began to slump. It began to drop off because the very gritty element of the characters, which Chris Claremont was so well known for, began to kind of go away. But by 1991 or so, Rob Liefeld was introduced as part of the New Mutants lineup. Now, at the time, he wasn't necessarily a main creator, or I guess a main creator in the series. He was more like a co-creator of sorts. But by issue number 97, Louise Simonson had more or less been I guess pushed out the door. She wasn't really eliminated from the series, so to speak, but she was certainly being handed her hat. And what Rob Liefeld had done is he had taken these concepts of characters that had previously existed and began to fold them in. And this is when we saw the New Mutants starting to move in the direction of a combination with Cable being introduced and then moving in the direction of the actual X-Force team. We of course saw with New Mutants issue number 98 the introduction of Deadpool. But with issue number 100 in 1991, the New Mutants series was brought to an end. And when it was, the New Mutants themselves were rolled over into the actual group X-Force, which was led by Cable. And this is something that would go on for a number of years until about 2002, when the overall X-Force series began to come to a close. Now eventually Marvel would bring the X-Force series back. They would reboot it with Uncanny X-Force, but again, this wasn't a series that was wildly well received. And so overall, Marvel brought the whole thing to an end. But again, this is the significance of New Mutants in Marvel Comics. New Mutants allowed us to be introduced to a multitude of different characters, but we saw with the New Mutants aging, with them getting older, that the series grew, the series progressed, new things were being introduced, and Marvel began to segue the entire X-Men, or I guess X-Universe concept into a new direction in the 1990s by crossing it all over into a multitude of different series, ultimately culminating in the 1995 Age of Apocalypse storyline. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.